There you go. Thank you.
Peter's fantastic pasture management and feeding of cows. Now we've been able to prove the concept of doing very high per cow production, 500 kilos of cow in a grass-based system. But yeah, that's come at probably a wee bit of a cost on the way through around, you know.
Yeah, oh, okay. You got it? Yeah, she's got it, I got it. Yeah.
I didn't hear the beginning of it. I'll read about it. Sounded sad. Did you have a good one?
Probably not. I'm a bit busy today.
Hello, Phil. How are you?
Thursdays, I've got a practice in the afternoon, but yeah, lunchtime, before lunchtime. Like around 10. Yep, 11 would be great.
With that too? Yep.
The shit, please.
Righto, if you come just a wee bit closer, lie down. Good on you, spot on. Yeah, munch on a bit of grass, a bit of clover. So we've put together the A team for pasture. Really appreciate the help. So first we're going to have a scene setting exercise by David Chapman.
And also I think going forward, the fact that it's a natural thing. Cows have been grazing grass for millions of years, and don't worry about me, you're worried about this. Sorts out your priorities, doesn't it? And, you know, as we look forward and adding value with consumers, they're going to be looking for natural things. And so it's pretty important this pasture remains firmly in our focus. And I've got 10 minutes and to summarise a whole pasture renewal, how to choose a ryegrass, etc., program, and I can't do it. So the one thing I will say to you is there's a whole lot of ways to farm. Decide what's your strategy around pasture. Get a bit of help and expert advice about what that is and get into it. Because there's different ways of doing things. I'm going to talk today about ryegrass. I've been asked to talk a bit about ryegrass choice. And this is on page 44 of the handout. And this first diagram, for you older people, the nice thing is that it's never changed. The principles of what we do in terms of choice of ryegrass species has always been the same. To the left-hand end of this, we got the annuals and Italians. They're the party animals of the ryegrass. They take cocaine. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, should I, nowadays? But they're the party animals. They burn themselves out. They grow like crazy. They're phenomenal things for 12 months. A bit like some of the younger staff around here. But the ones on the right, the perennials, they're the ones who believe in superannuation and plant reserves and keeping things quietly, and they're the long-term things. So we've got this, there's no one species, it just depends where you want to use them. So the first thing is we put the annuals at the left, the Italians, they're about a 12-month pasture, the hybrids, sort of 2 to 5 years, and then on this side we come on to the different perennials, which are the permanent pasture. And it just depends what you want. If you want something for 12 months, go for an Italian ryegrass, nothing will grow you more. But in our dairy systems, perennials are still king. We want that permanent pasture that will last for quite a few years. And within this, there's different types. And we've seen a change in Canterbury. And I want to do a little bit of a straw poll with you guys. We've got diploid perennials, diploid tetraploid mixes, perennial mixes, and tetraploid perennials. In the last couple of years, who here has been focusing on diploid perennials? The good old diploid perennial, let's say a standard for dairy pastures, who's been sowing those? We're not getting many hands up. Okay, diploid tetraploid perennial mixes. Yes, we're getting quite a few more. Straight tetraploids. Yeah, we're getting a few of those. And that sort of shows you, for a start, I said there's lots of different ways to farm, so deciding what they are. So why would you use one versus the other? And Jeremy, my fine assistant, said, oh, God, we've got the principal scientist of Dairy NZ to come here to help me. Can I just give us a hand? Oh, come on. Just take the top one off. So this is also in the handout, and the reason we're pretty interested in tetraploids and the story around what's happened at Lincoln and why we've been so excited is that we've gone from, actually we went back a little bit earlier than this, I don't know, some of you remember we had 680 cows at Lincoln, and about 10 years ago we went to 630 cows and we've gone to 550 cows. And the profitability hasn't changed that much. The trick to that is as we've decreased cows, we've increased the kilograms of milk solids a cow. It's a pretty neat trick. It's a bit of a faith when you cut your cow numbers and you believe the milk solids has got to go up the cow. So we need more allowance of pasture a cow. We've got to get them to eat more. The really nice thing is when you increase from 18, 19 kilograms of dry matter at this system at peak to 19 to 20, it's only an extra kilogram of dry matter, but it's all going into milk. Remember the first sort of 7 or 8 kilos go into maintenance, so you paid for that, so the extra kilo stuff in all goes into milk. So we suddenly get a much better energy efficiency conversion. And what's also happened with these use of tetraploids has been inadvertent things, as Peter Hancock's has worked through how the system worked and how it needs to work. The grazing rounds got longer. There's about 2 grazings less a paddock. So we used to graze paddocks about 12 times. Now we graze them about 10 times a year. Which is actually pretty cool because every time we graze, there's a danger of stuffing it up. So, simpler system. Higher pre-grazing covers. So the pre-grazing cover at Lincoln used to be around 3,000, 3,100 with diploids. We moved to putting tetraploids in the pasture, we can go higher. And about 3,400 is about the limit, and the cows will still graze that to a good residual at that level. That's really neat because grass grows grass. You've all heard grass grows grass. So we've got higher covers. And what we believe from the science and everything we've seen, we're growing about a tonne more dry matter per hectare for nothing, for having more grass. Grass grows worse, more photosynthesis. So we get an extra tonne, higher allowance. And the trouble with this higher allowance and higher covers is we need harder grazing. We've got harder grazing management because we're running higher covers and surpluses happen more quickly, right? So grazing management. The downside of the Lincoln system, less cows, Higher cover, things happen very quickly, so we've got to be on the ball. So that's the balance of it. So the trick of this, and this is much better than the one in your handout, which is in black and white and hard to see, is that when we mix the diploids and tetraploids, and we've had the straight tetraploids, and straight tetraploids are fantastic, but they're a bit like ice cream to a cow, and we found they mash them, and in general they only last 5 or 6 years. We really damage them. So we started mixing these diploids and tetraploids, and the first question we always got was, well, don't the cows pick the tetraploids out? And no, they don't, because they're all intertwined. There's about 5,000 tillers every square metre of pasture, and the cows just go in there. And what they do is they love the tetraploid, but they're grazing the diploid at the same time. So when you put the diploid and tetraploid together, we get extra palatability, better intakes. The cows love tetraploids. But as they graze down, they start hitting the diploids and the basal stems of diploids. That's the problem with diploids once they get above 3.2. They start getting a bit stemmy and hard to graze. So they help you from overgrazing, because the one big problem we've had with straight tetraploids is overgrazing and damaging them. So this has been a big compromise, the diploid tetraploid, and it's a really neat thing in terms of improving the nitrogen and the levels in terms of nitrogen leaching and greenhouse gas efficiencies at Lincoln with having less cows are significant. And I would say, as an industry, use of tetraploids as one part of the system changes to get more milk solids per cow and less environmental consequences, just going to be the way we're going to have to go. Right. I'll come back to the original thing, which was just so where would you use the shorter term ryegrasses? And annuals, Italians and hybrids are all really good short term things if you want to pasture for 1 year, 2 year, up to 5 year for hybrids. But the one thing we also use them a lot, and they work incredibly well, is this diagram. And this is a lovely diagram because it's about racing between you and the weeds. When you get an event like a treading event would be the main one we have at Lincoln University Dairy Farm at the early spring. We just have cows and it rains at night. We do some damage, and our desirable species, which we had lots of, take a hit. And unfortunately in the soil on dairy farms there's been work, and there are millions of weed seeds in the soil on every dairy farm in New Zealand. And if you have bare ground, it's a very temporary thing, and your favourite weeds start coming up, whether they be thistles or docks or annual or whatever your favourite weed is. So what we've got is an opportunity before the weeds come up to rush in there with a drill and quickly undersow. And this is about keeping the productivity, every square metre of the farm at maximum productivity. And this works really well with annuals, Italians and hybrids because they're very fast establishing. If you want to be back and put that paddock into crop in a year, put in an annual. You don't want to do anything for 2 to 5 years, put in a hybrid. You might actually put in a perennial if you think you never want to resow it. So, just to summarise, to wrap it all up, in 10 minutes on setting a whole pasture renewal program for 100 people, decide on your strategy on your pasture plan. Each one of you will have different things they want to do and work through, and understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of the program. There's no one program for everyone. Ryegrass has been our key feed in New Zealand as a grass because it's just easy to establish, easy to graze. Not perfect. There's no perfect pasture plant, but it's a really top performing balance of features. Perennial ryegrass is king, and what we believe we'll see is more tetraploid pasture use, either as tetraploids or as diploid tetraploid mixes. Italians annuals, great for 6 to 18 months feed with great cool season production, grow like crazy. Hybrid ryegrass, great for 18 months to 5 years, and the Dairy NZ Forage Value Index is a really neat place to start to get some first initial information around pasture ryegrass cultivars. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Graham, and we'll come back to questions for all three speakers at the conclusion of the session. So next we've got Alistair Moorhead from Agricom. Alice, we had in our previous session quite a bit of discussion around clover and how we can use that as a tool to come back to 190 kilos of N. Al's pretty passionate about herbs and clovers and all things in grass, so thank you, Alistair.
Right, hi everyone, my name's Alistair Moorhead. I'm the Product Development Manager for Agricom, and we're going to change tack a little bit because we're going to look at the second part of a pasture and what's changed in just 18 months. So if I stood in front of you 18 months ago and you asked me why would I want to try and elevate my farm clover content beyond the industry averages of 8 to 12, and I'd have listed three things for you. And the third would be nitrogen fixation. The third. Not the first, the third. So what would the first two be? The first one, Darian Zed's done a heap of work on this all through the late 90s and into the 2000s. Fundamentally, small changes that you and I wouldn't even be able to tell as far as content of white clover in your pasture, immediately affect your VAT. So white clover gives you milk solids. That would be my first one, why you'd want a little bit more there. The second one relates a little bit to the topic we've just discussed as well, and about pasture management. Basically, if you have a good white clover content, you have a much bigger range of tolerance to grazing and grazing residuals. Fundamentally, if you've got a good content, cows actively seek out and uniformly graze a pasture. So grazing management nationally would be another reason I would be driving for a good white clover content in your pastures. But here we are in 2021 and we've got a whole lot of new rules looming. And one of those rules is a reduction or a capping of nitrogen use. So fundamentally your nitrogen reserves, and there's a lot of industry people in the fertiliser industry here today, but fundamentally as far as nitrogen reserves go, we're all standing on a lot of nitrogen at the moment. Did a soil test here right now. I don't know, you look at this farm and it's looking extremely good. You know, nitrogen patches are moderate for its nitrogen use in a calendar year. That would suggest to me that soil available nitrogen on this farm would be sitting somewhere around that 130 to 150 units of N available in the soil to be released when the soil conditions are right for it to be mineralised and mobilised and become plant available. So the key is there's a pool already sitting there. But as we drive down total nitrogen use, that pool will slowly get depleted unless it's being topped up for free. And that's where we come to this really critical point of what makes our New Zealand system so efficient in the long term. And fundamentally that is the relationship white clover has with rhizobia for absorbing atmospheric nitrogen and converting it to plant available nitrogen in its roots. Now magically, that doesn't just emerge all across your farm. Fundamentally, when roots break down, they typically die and nodules on white clover shed in the middle of the summer when the soil temperatures are really hot, and in the middle of winter when they're cold. So fundamentally, the majority of the root mass that's going to break down and mineralise is firing up your spring peak, just when you're putting more nutrient on as well. It's right about that time that the roots in the soil are starting to break down and release more nitrogen. And likewise, that autumn flush we get probably in this region is probably about the start of April. And that's where you see that crude protein spike in April. And so that's the mineralisation of roots that have been dying through summer. It just doesn't come all the time. What does come all the time is the fact that a white clover leaf has not got a brown stem. It's always green, and it's always got a good nitrogen content because it's got its own nitrogen factory in it. However, when that gets moved around your farm, it is part of the neuron patch cycles you see across your property. And so the 28% of a paddock, which has got neuron patches per annum in it, is driven by the nitrogen content of your grass, but your nitrogen content of your legumes. And that's the cycling. The roots drive the spring flush and the autumn flush, The leaf drives the accumulation of nitrogen via neuron patches throughout the year. So that's the cycle. It's not that magical. The other part that comes with this, though, is you've got to grow a lot of clover to get a lot of nitrogen. The efficiency rate for all our white clovers has been pretty static, and it seems like it's probably in the hands of future generations of rhizobia and changes of rhizobia where we might elevate our efficiencies. But it sits at around 26 to 28 grams per kg of dry matter grown. So that means if you only grow 1 tonne of legume, you get 26 to 28 kgs of nitrogen per annum for free. It might make the difference for some of you, but on the scale of it, it's not massive. You need to grow a lot of legume to get a lot of nitrogen. But what's coming? We are going to see a reduction in nitrogen in our landscape. Our pastures are consistently hungry. They always respond. You can see this in the urine patches alone. It's very hard to put enough nutrient on to actually not see your urine patches. And the reality is, as our nitrogen profile on our farms gets smaller and smaller or lower, our reserves get lower, we will see white clover will naturally become stronger on your farms. But it will cycle. It will go through cycles where you have big years, and then it'll build up natural soil reserves, and then the ryegrasses will become dominant, and then you'll go cycle down in legume content. And that's a very, very natural cycle. It typically is oscillating between elevating nitrogen contents, decreasing white clover contents, reducing nitrogen contents, elevating legume contents. So that's the future we're all got coming at us one way or another. Some of your soils have more resilience, and because they've got the resilience, it will be expressed in different ways. But on some of your light country, you will see it faster than some of the heavier country, the importance of that legume cycling. I just want to emphasise, to get clover present, we are in a different discussion than just us discussing the management criteria for ryegrass. Sowing depth is critical. It's a small seed that establishes fast, but actually then slows down, because initially it has a taproot. And it's during that filling out of that taproot that it slows down and gets overwhelmed by ryegrass. So sowing depth is still a critical point to getting the massive amount of clovers there to start with. And we're aiming to deliver that at between around 1 centimetre to 1.5 centimetres in depth. And that depth control is important. What you tend to find is roller drilling is an outstanding way of establishing clover, but it comes at a cost. On the free draining light soils, that can be in a very variable strike, a very slow accumulation, all of which benefit legumes. So they are the pretty big drivers. If you're driving for high first yields, high first covers, and early production out of young pastures, you're not always driving for the characteristics that will give you good white clover content in the early stages of a young pasture. So placement of the seed, on the surface white excels, ryegrass doesn't. When it's sown in a row, they both get away really well, but white needs light. So the more you favour the grass in that establishment management, the more the clovers get smothered out with time, because they need light. And so first 6 to 8 months of a pasture, when the covers increase, that is the tough time for white clover to get established. The runners, the stolons that run across the ground, white spends all its life trying to run away from itself. So fundamentally, some of these plants around me now in a circle of 2 to 3 metres, if this is a mature pasture, there's a very good chance there's white clovers that are actually genetically exactly the same on an arc between 2 and 3 metres around me. Because once that taproot's dead, it's out on its stolons. And it's living a life trying to find light, moving to space. White thrives on space. Completely different to our discussion about driving resilience and grazing resilience on your farm, completely different to driving for high pasture production. It does complement high pasture production because in laxer systems it does excel, and we can see it's working at the covers that have been driven on this farm, which are slightly higher, and the residuals that are slightly higher. But we just got to remember light is the driver to white clover movement. You do need key nutrients to drive this, and this is what the heritage of our New Zealand farming system has been. We've dealt with pH, we've elevated our phosphate use. They are the things that drive legumes. Behind that comes really key nutrients that we're deficient in, one anyway, and that's sulphur. And that's a real driver to legume performance. And behind that is potassium, and most of our soils have got adequate potassium, but every now and then, due to environmental conditions, the state of the soil and the environment, we're not releasing the potassium fast enough to boost your legumes and even your pasture at critical points of time. So the reality is our soils are naturally good for potassium, but never rule it out as a reason why your clovers aren't booming, because it may not be for that moment of time. And then your micronutrients, boron, magnesium, and molybdenum. And molybdenum is for the rhizobia to be fully functional in fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere for free. So that's a big deal. Now, just be aware, it's a very, very small amount we're talking about with trace elements. It's minute. You don't want to get your decimal places in the wrong place, because that's a disaster. So we are talking about a very strategic, thoughtful process of utilising micronutrients to maximise white clover production and performance. Touching on very, very quickly other species, red clover. Red clover has an undeniable future in dairying. The reality is, the first place for that is on your runoffs. It is still an intermediate sort of species between white clover and lucerne. And what that means, it does like longer rotation lengths. And we've talked about a farm here that has got a higher pre-grazing mass, a slightly higher post-grazing residual, slightly longer rotation lengths at 22 to 23 days once we hit out of spring. But the reality is, that's only just okay for red clover. It sort of sits at that 22 to 28 day rotations, and that's why once you get into a runoff environment, you've got a completely different farming system, completely different drivers, and red thrives in that environment. And I can't emphasise enough, with the way the nitrogen legislation is going, if you aren't already moving towards red on runoffs, it is very much a powerhouse of getting extra performance out of those environments for less. One seed, one plant. Can't discuss persistence if you don't know how much you got there to start with. And a couple of Ks doesn't go a long way during an establishment phase, and how much you have. Doesn't reseed easily, again, unless you make poor quality silage in the autumn where you might get some seed set. It takes a long time to mature and actually pump seed back into your ground. But red has a place. In the platform, its strength is it's not running away from itself for all its life. You planted it, it's there. No matter what goes on around it, until it physically dies, it's holding that space and contributing with a legume in that space for the whole of its life in your pasture. So that's the one strength of red. Some of the other things haven't changed. With all legumes, bloat is always a consistent and current profile. Many of the industry people would still describe it as a feeding disorder, and I would describe it as actually the reality is we can all have a bad day and no one likes that. So it's often a case of cold mornings. People who have high legume content in their pastures, you tend to find they are on average better at dealing with it over time, and the people that do drive for high legume contents in your pastures, you actually would have to say that they like where they're at. They've dealt with that as a system as they move towards higher and higher legume content, and more importantly, it can be done. But like I say, bloat is an issue that no one likes having, and it can be as bad as just one bad morning. So we have to deal with that with time and understand those threats that create that problem. The herbs, they have a place in pasture, and in a new world, that place actually becomes more and more interesting. They thrive on the same space that clovers thrive on. So having space in pasture is important, and they provide advantages in the summer and the autumn. Again, a time that's going to be important for us going forward. Not wanting to dwell on them too much more because it's been driven by legumes and these drops are just getting bigger. So I think we'll pull the plug there, Jeremy, and just see how many questions are going to come based on the circumstances.
You might be quite right, Al.
Yeah.
Look, it's a bit unfortunate, isn't it?
Yeah, just a bit.
Because we actually have the A team here. We have probably the best team in terms of pastures in the South Island here. With your presenters here, so we've gone for top shelf. But so that we'll try a few questions and see how we go. If you're not too wet. Tony.
Just hearing about the clovers, the sowing rate of ryegrass and you heard over the speaker on
Yeah, so I'll fill that one in for you, Tony. So we had a challenge, and Mark was a bit brave when you guys weren't in the audience, being Graham and his suggestion was, pulling back our ryegrass, diploids back to as low as 12 kilos, tetraploids as low as 16 kilos to encourage better clover establishment.
So, do you mind? Shall I just cover both topics at the same time?
Yeah, I'll add the vote.
No, actually, you do your first point, because we were discussing, we had a nice question along the same lines, by the way, in the previous audience, and I'll set the context to it. Graham was asked a question about what are the sowing rates for these diploid, tetraploid mixes, diploids by themselves, and tetraploids. And I think if I asked you that question, if we run the same sort of process as we did last time, I think it would answer your question at the same time.
Yeah, so, I mean, our normal standard sowing rates for a diploid perennial is about 20 kilos a hectare, and then you add clovers to that. That's been a fairly standard sowing rate. Tetraploids, they're a big seed, so the standard sowing rate is about 30 kilos. They're a bit cheaper per kilo, but big seed, so you just need more kilos to get the same number. If you're mixing a diploid, tetraploid, about 10 of the diploid and about 15 of the tetraploid, so we're just half the rates of each. And that seems to give a reasonably mixed pasture. Yeah.
And so then I stepped in to answer that question, because I'm putting another hat on. And my hat is that the value proposition is aiming to drive and move towards that 30% legume content, which was over the years have sort of been settled on as a idealistic ideal, basically. And the big point with Graham's recommendation is that that is going to give the most uniform, resilient style of pasture to multiple sowing conditions, multiple weed burdens, multiple other things that are required of a pasture. Economics of first grazing, volume, all of those things, those recommendations do sit as, I just see them as, go-to mixes for reliability. Then, though, you ask the question, how do I drive higher legume contents? Now, I think in my world, the numbers that you've just quoted from the previous discussion are sitting at the low end, and the reality is I always discuss the low end of the sowing rates with a caveat, and the caveat is very, very important. You will give up about 600 to 800 kilograms of dry matter inside the first 6 to 8 months with that. You will expose yourself to weed burdens and bare ground through first spring grazing. And if you have docks, Californian thistle, nodding thistle, whatever, you will expose yourself to more weed seed due to slower first grazing masses and establishment. So I've always looked at it from a halfway house of, I would definitely go there if that is a principle that you want to look at, which is the low sowing rates. You've got to understand you'll be slower to first grazing. Your first grazing mass could be less. Your residuals will be actually hard to manage because your pastures will be more open. Therefore, you might drive to lower residuals. Therefore, you'll get less on the regrowth cycles. You'll be forced into herbicide use. What does that mean for white clover establishment? All of these things that, are unintentional consequences of a very sound practice, which is reducing sowing rates to those levels that you're already mentioning. So in my eyes, it's as much a commitment to coming off the perfect into something that's reasonable, and actually my diploid figure might be 16 kilograms, because I'll be trying to get a bit of plantain in there as well as the white clover. The tetraploids, I'll be drifting down into the 20 mark, but again, I'd be very worried about how open my pasture is, so I don't want total confidence that you're going to manage it well. But these are the things, this would be my intermediate drop-off in sowing rate, but with the caveat, you're going to grow less in the first 6 months. You could be more open, so you need to be all over this, because as the experience in our LUD highlights, one bad moment could set the template for the productivity of that pasture for the rest of its time. So they're just the flow-on effects.
Just to add on that, I'm going to take a slightly different tact, because all different opinions are different things, and there's no single way. I would say the single biggest problem is sowing in drill rows. I hate drill rows. We jam ryegrass and clover together and we expect clover to come up, particularly at 6-inch or 15 centimetre rows. 12 centimetre rows are better. If you're putting in drill rows, you're not doing the right thing by your clover, right? Use a roller drill. Or I've got guys using row drills with a small seed box. Put the clover on in front. Just take the coulters off and sprinkle the clover around. We get really good clover through the roller drill at Lincoln, sowing at 25 kilos of a diploid tetraploid mix with clover through good establishment and shallow sowing of the clover and keeping them separate. And low sowing rates will help you a bit, but keeping the clover and ryegrass out of tight drill rows is the trick, full stop.
And just to add a bit of context too, if you're going to do low sowing rates, everything's got to be going right. So Mark made a comment about the drill going slow. You've got to have a clean, tidy paddock. You've got to have confidence in your soil moisture and getting a good strike, etc. So if you can't tick all those boxes, stick with the standard. But if you can tick those boxes, and to Al's point, you want to be focused on clover, then give it a go. But just be careful with it.
Absolutely.
One more question.
We have a field day every week, so it rains.
Question.
Question. We'll do two questions for you, Ben. Just a quick question on clover sowing rates.
Look, at the end of the day, the discussion that we've just had about placement and in space, based on roller drilling, rows versus surface sowing, they are the drivers. Doesn't matter what rates you use, if you're chucking them in with no space, you're still coming back to the same issues. So definitely industry rates at around 5 kilograms of white clover are in the zone of being heaps of clover. Everything after that is about competition and management of that competition.
Last question, Ben. Same question.
But
plantain rate?
Oh shit, that's a little bit more resilient. 2 to 3 kilograms is a very competitive amount of plantain and pasture, especially the autumn-winter active types. They actually establish very, very well at those levels. As far as topping things up over time, about the same rates as well. Again, space drives everything. If there's space, they will turn up, absolutely. Comment just quickly about from the previous audience associated with how long some things take to come up. If they're sown at the same time as the pasture, they'll be there right at first grazing, obviously, and all the way through. If you're broadcasting onto the landscape like this, be aware your efforts in broadcasting both with white clover, red clover, plantain and or chicory will take anywhere up to 6 to 12 months to be seen. They will turn up. You can't click your fingers and they'll be there tomorrow. So they're small plants, they stay small plants under big plants for a long period of time, and then you tend to find they come through in the summer, following summer.
Great. I'll get us out of the rain. But hey, thanks very much. These guys could have taken the whole day up for us, so they had to cram into an hour. Much appreciated for Alistair, Graham and David. Thank you to Mark and Penny and Joseph and Jen for hosting us today. Much appreciated.
Gamay. Sure. Ipan na kay kaon. Gutom na mga farmer.
Una yung daghan sila kwarta kay rain or shine, no? Dili mo tuos ulan ba?
Ito mga pagkaib sa ginto.
Ha? Ansa?
Sa ginto. Wala eh. Dayon.
Di mo tuos ulan ba? Bahalag basa na kayo. Kita mo na, basa na kayo. Ha? Rain or shine. But I'd better.
Tingka na.
Uli na lang tayo.
Kaon ko eh.
Yung sa mga pagkuha, tro.
Tro.
Ano man ang flavor? Katapak mo sila dito.
Steak.
Namin di ay, hindi taong ko. Gutom kayo.
Kain na, gutom na. No?
Sige.
Sleeves, if you could fill them out, that would be awesome. Circle a few things, you don't have to put your name.
Didn't get one.
Yeah, let us know what you found this year would be really good. It helps us for next time.
The food is good.
Yes, that's what I want to hear. Patients were pretty cool as well. Any feedback you guys can provide would be great. We've got lots of feedback forms. Also done.
Kaon di buot na ako malipong sa lutong giatat na.
Ano na?
Wala ko kaon kan. Kapit ra ko nyag balay dayon. Banta na siya. Jangan panahan.
Program naman.
Anak ka program lagi mo man eh.
Container.
Ulit, kadali.
Bigyan niyo please.
Saan na, pre? Feedback form? Ito, may kabili sa kuhan?
Sa
Cricket ya pun?
Yahay kay maron ba trabaho sige mo.
Mak na po, nana po may atuan. Nya? Wala akong kumoy kuhan. Na po may baka? Wala na, horot na? Kurang na yung semana. Mo na? Mak na may kuhan ba? Seminar lim. Sa? Lim. Asa? Wala ko kakuhan? Hindi ko na mga tao. Ha? Mga tao na. Tapos seryoso gini apa di kampung? Seryoso gini mahal di kampung? Berapa boleh?
Ano daw iya? Lami siya eh.